Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ash here coming at you today in Clash Royale with Brandank back on the channel. Brandank, how you doing, dude?
Doing great.
I'll tell you what, man. I've noticed on Twitter, you, in Swood, in Bag, in so many pros who I respect their opinions, saying that this deck, as a matter of fact, you guys can see it on the screen, this one yesterday by Bag, he's like, this deck is so broken, please Supercell fix it, it's so OP. And you've been just rattling off GCs. It's obviously an amazing ladder deck as well. This is the deck. It's Mortar Rascals. Brandank, let me start by asking you, is this deck really that powerful, in your opinion? Is it broken?
I think it's probably the best deck in this meta by far, and I think that it's one of the most consistent decks you could ever ask for. The release of the Rascals has really, I think, changed the game to a huge extent, mainly because the Rascals are super good with Mortar. It's basically like a free Knight plus Archers, where the Knight has the health of a Bowler and the Archers have more DPS than the Archers. And for one less elixir, and it provides a sort of element of bait. And combined with the Minion Horde, which is, I think still a little bit too strong, I think all these cards, when used together, are just, really, have great synergy. And my Rascals that I used in the Grand Challenge replays I'll be showing, they're level 7, and I still went 12-0 both times on different accounts. So that shows really how strong this deck is.
Wow, yeah, and you'd say even so that is it safe to say this is a viable ladder deck, even if your Rascals are kind of underleveled compared to your other cards?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that the Rascals, even if they're level maybe 11 or 12, you can still use them on ladder, and they're great.
Well, you're talking to top ladder players too, because obviously a lot of my viewers are just mid-range anyway. But I get what you're saying though. So they serve a purpose, in some regards, regardless of level, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the deck itself. How do you playing this deck differently than you are, say, the Hog Mortar deck or just Mortar Cycle? Obviously, I'm sure it has a lot to do with the Rascals, so maybe start with a synergy between the Mortar and the Rascals and how you're playing them.
Yeah, so anytime I've coached Mortar or Mortar Bait, I always tell my clients to identify 2 important things. So what spells they have to counter your bait cards, especially Minion Horde, because your Minion Horde, if it gets a lot of value, essentially wins you the game. And also to identify cards such as Ice Golem, Ice Spirit, Electro Wizard, anything that you would want out of cycle in order to use your Minion Horde. Then I tell them to identify the overall deck your opponent has to determine whether or not to go for aggressive offensive mortars or to go for more defensive mortars. Against decks such as Bridge Spam, P.E.K.K.A, Logbait, those are kinds of decks that you can spam offensive mortars against. But decks such as Golem, giant triple spells, you need to be a little bit more defensive in terms of how you play and play a lot more passively. Then you can go for miners on the tower for counter pushes with those swarm troops rather than going for aggressive mortar shots on tower. And I think with this, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No.
Yeah, I think with this deck in particular, the Rascals slow down the cycle a little bit because you don't have Ice Golem anymore. Instead, you have Rascals. But I think the Rascals provide much more defensive utility in terms of their ability to be able to take on larger units on their own, rather than the Ice Golem that just kites units and sort of buys you time instead of actually doing DPS, which the Rascals do.
Yeah, absolutely, and you can see the Rascals just in this replay that we're watching right now, how you're using them in different situations, sometimes offensively at the bridge, sometimes defensively. I feel like there's so many questions to ask you about this deck, so let's just start with the beginning of the match. You already talked about identifying key cards in your opponent's deck to counter Minion Horde. Talk about maybe when you're going to use your first Mortar push, when's your first, well, I don't know, it's hard to call it a push, but when you're going to use your first Mortar, and what you're looking for in terms of key information the first time that you're using the Mortar.
So I first, for starting plays, I usually start out with a Goblin Gang in the back, perhaps split, or perhaps Spear Goblins at the bridge. But I usually don't prefer to start out with the Mortar, because if my opponent's running Golem or Giant, it can be sometimes hard to defend their push, especially if they have a lot of spells. So the first time I use the Mortar, I won't preemptively play anything until I know what their deck is, or else I just run the risk of playing troops into essentially nothing. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So first Mortar is almost experimental. You're just you're not necessarily trying to get a lock and ton of damage. You're just trying to find out what their go-to counters are.
Yeah. And then, eventually, after I know what their responses are, I usually play like predictive plays, such as like Spear Goblins at the bridge, right after I play the Mortar. Maybe I'll play Rascals if they also play their Rascals at the bridge. I usually just go for more predictive plays after I've scouted out their deck and seen what they usually use to counter my Mortar.
Okay, sounds good. Listen, I think the best way to proceed with this video is for you to kind of break down some of these matches that you had. Now, you have a couple 12 wins here, as you mentioned, and you also have a couple wins versus really good opponents that weren't 12 wins, but against more difficult matchups. So let's start with the 12 wins first. And with any Mortar deck, once you take the first tower, especially if it's early on, I think you did that in both of the 12 wins, maybe if I'm right. When you get that tower early on, it's just a game of just playing defense. So we'll just fast forward after you get the first tower down, but maybe you can just walk us through your mindset early on in those matches. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Let's do it. All right, let's start with the one against, well, the Japanese guy, I guess, or Korean, I don't know.
Okay.
The Brandank one.
Okay.
All right, so I'm pressing play in 3, 2, 1, go. So yeah, just kind of walk us through your process here. It looks like this starting hand is fairly decent. Is there such thing as a bad starting hand in this deck?
I think a bad starting hand would involve maybe the opponent pumping up, and I won't have Miner and Cycle, or I won't have a way to punish the pump, such as like Rascals, or something like Goblin Gang, Miner, or something like that. So maybe that would be a bad starting hand. Other than that, I don't think there's too bad of a starting hand that you can have with this deck.
And last question before we get to the play-by-play is, if they do pump up, and in a perfect case scenario, what is going to be your response? Just Miner on the pump?
I would probably go Rascals one lane, then I would go Goblin Gang in the other lane, and then I'd go with a Miner on the pump.
Okay.
Reason why I would actually prefer to play other cards first is because then I'll try to distract him by having him play like ground responses to those units, and then he won't have as much of a response to my Miner.
I hate when that happens, and it's a good call. Good. Okay, so now bring us into this match here. So you know pretty much what deck he's playing. I haven't caught if he played the Goblin Barrel yet, but so you go in with that pretty aggressive Horde. What was your thought process there?
So he just used his Fireball, and I know that if he tries to defend my Miner, he won't have enough Elixir for Princess. So I decided to just use the Miner Goblin Gang there. Sorry, the Miner Minion Horde there, and that pretty much just like took his tower.
And it sounds like you're not only keeping track of obviously what cards they have in hand, but also how much elixir they have. So it sounds like making your moves fast and decisively is a key part of success with this deck, and with any deck, I guess, right? Because if you had delayed more there, he would have had enough elixir for his princess.
Exactly. It's just about like knowing exactly what he has in cycle and knowing like punishing those big spells. And I pretty much did that, and so the rest of this replay is just like just defending.
Yeah. And then I'm not gonna go ahead and fast forward from here, but so now, okay, let's say that the folks out there are lucky enough to get that early tower advantage here. It seems like you're still playing offense here, so you're not like playing the deck incredibly differently, but at this point it's just defensive mortars and trying to chip away at the other tower. Is that pretty much, standard?
Yeah, just like against bait, if you see yourself falling behind, or against like some other decks, it's okay to play defensive mortars until, especially even in the mirror matchup, I think it's okay to play defensive mortars preemptively and then wait to see what your opponent does. If they can't punish you immediately, but if they can punish you, I wouldn't advise playing defensive mortars.
Okay, cool. Let's do the other 12 one. Ready?
Sure.
3, 2, 1, boom. All right, so this one is against Bridge Spam, which seems like it could be an annoying matchup for this deck. How do you feel about the matchup?
I think actually it's like a pretty good matchup. The mortar
is there a bad
matchup
value for this deck? I guess poison.
Yeah, there's definitely bad matchups. There's for example, Giant Double Prince is pretty bad with triple spells. Any deck with arrows, any deck involving Graveyard too is pretty rough.
Okay, well, we're going to cover both of those in the next two replays, Giant and Graveyard, so we can talk about basically the most difficult matchups. So because Giant's everywhere too, so people really ought to know how to handle that one. So here early on again, just kind of walk us through what's going on.
Yeah, so I actually made a mistake here. I meant to play my Minion Horde a bit off to the side, so it would avoid the Ice Golem death damage, but actually it did get into Frost Nova a little bit, so more of the Minion Horde died than I would have liked, so I didn't do as much damage as what I would have hoped for, but this is still a lot of damage. I knew that his Fireball was out of the rotation, so the Minion Horde was definitely a good idea there, and I went with the Miner on the tower even when I was really low on Elixir because I knew that he wouldn't have that good of a response to it.
So are you, I mean, obviously you played against Bridgestone before, but so when you're playing, do you just automatically know every card in their deck? You know, once you see their win condition or a few other cards? Or at least are you playing under the assumption those are the cards in their deck?
Yeah, I think this is a pretty common meta deck. So in this case, I sort of assumed that he was playing, of course, like Dark Prince, like Fireball.
Yeah, because you were aggressive
Inferno
out the
Dragon.
gate, so you
Yeah.
just you kind of figured the deck, and of course once you guys, the more you guys play, the more you'll be able to recognize like popular meta decks, and it goes for ladder too, like specific ranges in ladder. Speaking of ladder, as I know that this is a really popular free to play deck too, is there, how would you handle? It's probably not something you run into a lot in challenges, but how would you handle both Royal Giant and Elite Barbarian matchups with this deck?
So against Royal Giant, I would not advise playing offensive mortars at the bridge until you know that there are Royal Giants out of cycle. But even then, I don't think it's necessary to play mortars at the bridge. So a lot of the strategy against Royal Giant is playing defensive mortars, and in particular, making sure that it's like one tile below like the current placement of my mortar, like that you see like it's played defensively, so that like the Royal Giant will walk up to the mortar and get in tower range. And once you do that, then you just defend against the Royal Giant using your swarm cards, and then go with miners in the tower.
Okay, and do you try to hit opposite lane as the Royal Giant?
I
on
usually
offense?
try to go same lane because
Okay.
then I can have a counter push with whatever swarm troops that I have.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
But,
because your counter would probably be better than his counter. I was thinking
Yeah.
about the opposite way, but that makes sense. Okay, so here you're just doing a really good job defending, and you already have that right tower down so low. Obviously,
Yeah.
without a big spell, how are you handling these type? Just always sending the miner in close to the end, just exactly like you did.
Yeah, mostly I just send the miner in a lot and making sure that like I punish their spells. And
Okay.
On the note of like going like which lane to attack, I think it's also important to recognize that you should probably attack opposite lane if you notice that you're taking like a lot of damage in one certain lane. Going for mortars in the same lane as you're taking a lot of damage in usually isn't a good idea, because then they can just get spell value on the mortar, or they can just counter the mortar and they're attacking the same exact lane that they want to attack. So usually disrupting their flow of the offense by attacking the opposite lane is super important. And I think that's like especially paramount in the Graveyard matchup that I have one of the
let's do
replays
it.
in.
Yeah, let's do that graveyard one, and let's watch it in 3, 2, 1, play. All right, so a graveyard matchup here. Just while we're kind of loading up this one, while we're getting into the gameplay, against a mirror match, against another mortar deck, are you playing defensive mortars, offensive mortars? What do you do in that situation? Or, you know, it doesn't have to be, it could be a mortar hog deck, but, you know, the similar type archetype.
So I actually have a replay that I shared earlier. It's actually against Wonder Brad, one of the YouTubers, pretty
shout out
famous
to
guy.
Wonder Brad. What's up, man?
Yeah.
He's the best. All right, cool.
Yeah, so he had a bit of an advantage since he had level 9 Rascals, but how I won the matchup was taking advantage of the fact that he would sometimes use Zap on my Goblin Gang or something, and once you use Zap, then it's a really good opportunity for you to go for like Rascals Minion Horde or like Miner Minion Horde. That's how I won some of my matchups against several pro players in like some of the brackets I played, such as like against Air Surfer. I made sure that I always punished their usage of Zap. And playing defensive mortars is also a really good idea because it's hard for them to apply pressure since most of their cards are swarm cards that the mortar handles really well. So playing defensive mortars when you feel like you're running behind or are looking for like a preemptive response to something, that's a really good idea.
Okay. So getting back to this match here, you I'm assuming you know what he has. Well, obviously now
Yeah.
you do. So how are you playing this? You said it was a very difficult matchup. Obviously, most of you have plenty of answers to Graveyard, but unfortunately, most of them are poisonable, or all of them are poisonable. So,
Yeah.
so how do you handle that?
So against Graveyard, it's important to always take out the tank first, especially since if they're able to like poison the minion horde. Let's say you play the minion horde like on the Graveyard, they'll just get poison value. Meanwhile, the tank is still taking for the Graveyard, and you just basically lose your tower. So how I defended there is making sure that I used the minion horde on the the mega minion and the ice golem. So I made sure that I killed the tank first, and then I used spear goblins and the log to clean up the skeletons. And now that the tank is gone, my tower was able to actually kill off most of the skeletons. So I actually defended pretty well there, but I know that I'm behind.
Yeah, and I've noticed that too. It's something that I've adjusted in my play more recently, is just focusing way more on the ice golem or the tank, and not even worrying right away about the skeletons. And you're right, the tower does a ton of damage. And I noticed that you also use defensive miners. Is that something that basically you have to do?
Yeah, I think essentially
when they poison.
I think it's actually a good idea. I don't think it's a desperation play at all because like if you don't have like a knight or you don't have Rascals in cycle, it's definitely a good idea to go for defensive miners against the Graveyard. because it's the only unpoisonable target outside of the Rascals.
Okay, and here you're down, quite a bit. But are you baiting out the poison at this point? Or you're trying to?
I'm trying to go opposite lane by mortars and trying to take advantage of the fact that he just uses log. And I know that I have to attack opposite lane because if I attack the same lane, he'll just get poison value on the mortar, and I just lose the game no matter what I do. So at this point, I'm just trying to apply pressure opposite lane and seeing what I can do. But I still know that I'm in trouble, and I know this guy's a really good player, given the way he's played.
Yeah, he's playing this very, very well, and I can't believe that you won this, because watching it, it's just like, how is he gonna win this? Because he does have like so many answers, and you don't have so many answers. It seems.
Yeah,
so you're applying a lot of pressure here.
So right here, I know that he's in a lot of trouble since he spent a lot of elixir to defend my mortar. He basically I got a free minion horde off because he played his mega minion and he played his musketeer right into the minion horde. So I knew that I would get a ton of value with the mortar right there, getting a shot off. Getting multiple shots off, and I was able to finish off the tower with the miner. So
wow, well played, man. So it seems like, as far as your go-to defense against the graveyard, it was like everything. Basically, like you used Rascals, you used miner, you used minion horde, you used Goblin Gang in that replay. So basically, it seems like you handled that matchup. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is you just tried to pick your spots, A, defend the best you can, focusing on the tank on the graveyard decks, and then B, just when he had that log or that poison out of cycle, just tried to punish as much as you could, but with spam in the other lane.
Exactly, and I think what I should have done a better job of was perhaps keeping Rascals in cycle for the graveyard, and then once he poisons them, then go for like a minion horde in the opposite lane. So that's probably something I should have watched out more to do, and making sure that my cycle was in line with making sure that the Rascals were in cycle for the graveyard. But since they were in cycle, I sort of had to have makeshift defenses and hope for the best.
Okay. Hey, let's do the giant counter deck because, hey,
sure.
two most difficult matchups. Let's make sure we handle them both. So I'm going to press play in 3, 2, 1. Another 20-win player, so you guys are aware. So this matchup, talk about how the overall philosophy on going up against a Goison matchup or giant double prince matchup, anything like that.
So against giant decks with many spells, the important thing is to not go very aggressive, which is why I don't typically like going for offensive mortars to start the game, because if they go for giants at the bridge or perhaps in the same lane as the mortar, then you're in a lot of trouble in terms of defending. Sure, you may be able to defend fairly well, but if they have a lot of spells, then it can be tough in the long run. So how I approach this matchup is by playing quite defensively. So usually I go for defensive mortars and try to make sure that I'm able to defend his pushes, and then eventually go for counter pushes with miner.
Okay. And is this the same way that you would handle a golem matchup?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
With the golem, I would try to definitely punish the opposite lane more once they use their golem.
But otherwise,
yeah, for sure. I usually like to reserve my mortar for defense rather than for offense.
Okay. And here you take a little bit of damage to the mini P.E.K.K.A, but again, now you know exactly what deck he's playing. So how are you going to win? We talked about defense. Let's talk about offense.
Yeah, so I think I noticed that this guy has a lot of spells, and
yeah, I can see that.
I'm pretty mad about that. Yeah, but mostly how I'm trying to approach this is that once he's doing a lot of damage in the opposite lane, I'll try to go for.
Ooh, you got the lock there.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, I got the lock, and I was really happy about that because I know that's really huge for me. And he actually just wasted his musketeer in the opposite lane, so he has no good answer for the mortar at the moment. So, and I know that even if I go opposite lane with mortar, I'm actually able to defend his giant with stuff like Goblin Gang, stuff like Rascals, etc. And once I bait the spells, I can go for additional swarm cards. So, but I do take a lot of damage here. What I should have done was probably go for a defensive miner, but I definitely took a lot more damage than I wanted to. So how I should have approached this better was perhaps not giving as much spell value in terms of, I think I actually gave him a Goblin Gang and Sphere Goblins all in one zap. So I definitely didn't expect him to go for zap at that particular moment. So I definitely should have spaced out my units better or tried to wait a little bit longer before playing my Goblin Gang.
Okay, it makes sense. And I noticed that obviously it's a very minor thing, but it comes in handy, is that you place the mortar when you're going against any sort of a tank. You place it one tile to the closest to the edge of the arena, just to try to avoid that giant like you did right there.
Yeah.
So
definitely placing it off the side is the best play.
Do you always do that? I missed the last. Is there ever a time where you should put it right on the tile?
I don't think there's ever a time you should put it like directly like in the middle. I think it's always better to place it off a little bit to the side.
Towards the side you're going for. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So again, just coming in with minor chip damage. You said that log in there, just trying to be super aggressive. Maybe if you had guards, but you ended up pulling out the victory there. So
Yeah.
being the hard counter, GG, and Brandank coming in with the Brandank BM. All right.
Sorry about that.
Dude,
Cover your eyes.
It's cool. It's cool. All right. So, listen, man. Thank you for reviewing the deck. Before you go, I do want to play the Lava Hound in the background, just because I know a lot of people struggle against Lava Hound matchups. So I'm gonna play that in the background. While I do, I wanted to kind of ask you, is how do you beat this deck? Because it's so annoying to go against. I hate going against Mortar, mainly because I suck at it. I feel like I feel like, you know, everybody knows to distract the Mortar with your Ice Golem or whatever that you have, but after that I feel like if a Mortar player puts a lot of pressure on me, I really struggle. So like, give us some generic advice against going against Mortar players.
So going against Mortar players, you need to realize like exactly what kind of Mortar deck they're playing. So if they're playing one of Minion Horde, make sure that you don't use your big spell on anything but the Minion Horde. I think it's paramount, because I played against like Backstab X in one of those Kranis Pro brackets, and he was like really tilted once he saw the Mortar, and he immediately tried to like kill the Mortar with everything he had, and he played like poison on it, he played like zappies on it. So I knew that he had he's playing Graveyard deck, by the way, so I knew that he had no answer for my Minion Horde, so I just went for a minor Minion Horde, and he just basically lost the tower and lost the game. So it's important to not like overreact or over defend them like against the Mortar. So definitely try to like you can actually, it's okay to take like a couple Mortar shots if you're behind an elixir. So definitely be okay with that. And also if you're playing a deck with like Princess or like Zap but not a big spell, make sure to keep those in cycle for the Minion Horde.
Okay, so worrying about the Minion Horde, saving your big spell for Minion Horde. I love the Three Musketeer Hunter Hog deck right now. And like, this is one of the biggest matchups that I struggle with. So, but I always kind of find myself using my Fireball against the Mortar because I run out of options after I use, you know, if I don't have my Hog in cycle after I use Ice Golem. So what would you advise I do?
So if you're playing the Three Musketeers Hog Rider deck, it's important to go for counter pushes once you've defended. It's not good to like, probably shouldn't like build a push in the back, and I think that like Three Musketeers are pretty much a dead card in that matchup because defensive Mortars can just get so much value on them.
Yeah.
So I think you need to treat it like a Hog Cycle deck and really try to outcycle the Mortar. And if you outcycle the Mortar with the Hog Rider and you use your Royal Ghost effectively against those Swarm cards, you're going to be able to break through at some point, maybe with a Prediction Fireball. Although it's a really tough matchup in general.
It is too, because I feel like if I use my Fireball, because you're always going to have your Mortar ready for my Hog, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like if I use a Fireball then, that I'm screwed for Minion Horde, as you said, you know. So it's a tough match. I hate it.
But actually, if they use their Mortar against your Hog, then you can actually feel free to play your Three Musketeers once they've done so, since they won't have as good of a response.
And when I play my Three Musketeers in front of the King Tower because of like how fast you can cycle back to it,
I would probably play behind the King Tower so I could like build a push, so I give me more time to be able to play cards in front of them.
All right. Well, hey, Brandank, thank you so much for coming back on the channel, man. You always do such a good job at breaking down these decks and kind of going into detail. I'm sure every viewer picked up a few tips on this deck if they want to pick it up and try it on ladder or in challenges. Any final words, anything going on in the life of Brandank that we should be knowing about, man?
Not really. I think I'd like to thank my practice partners like Juicy J, Carter, Swood, all those guys for helping me out. And I'll be looking out for a CRL team soon, so I'll be traveling to the Combine.
Nice.
And yeah, I've been a lot of things going on. I've been playing a lot of tournaments recently and playing in RPL with Complexity, so a lot going on, but I'm just looking forward to it.
Heck yeah, man. Wishing you the best of luck. And that whole foursome that you kind of outlined there, like, you're all spectacular players. So it's really cool to see you guys kind of practicing together and all like helping each other grow as players. I recently had Carter on the channel, and man, he was just awesome breaking down a deck. So shout out to all those guys, and thanks again, man. Appreciate it.
No problem. Always a pleasure coming on.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Make sure you check out Brandank's player profile. Thanks to statsroyale.com in the description below. Also, huge shout out to Bren Chong, my YouTube partner. Check out his information as well. Thank you for watching all the way till the end. Really appreciate it. And as always, take care, guys.